Stone Guardian. A Paranormal Protector Tale. Book 1 in the Heart of Steel series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Charlotte from Google. 27. After several hours of watching the slate Alethea called a television, she stretched and said, "Lunchtime, I think. Are you sure I can't get you anything?" "No, but I should carry you to the kitchen." He knew what they'd watched wasn't real, but there was one part of it he'd wished was real, for he wouldn't feel so useless if it were. She'd probably think he was silly, having to ask for her help, but, "Would you show me how to use the things in your kitchen? If I only knew how your coffee machine worked, or perhaps even your stove, I might be able to do some of the work, to keep you off that ankle." "You mean like if I stuck sticky notes to everything with instructions on how to use it?" "I was actually thinking about that when I saw it, only I'm not sure if my parents have any sticky notes in the house. Maybe in Dad's office." "I'll carry you there first." If she was willing, he'd do everything to make it easier for her. He needed to be the best protector possible, which meant adjusting to the numerous strange devices in this time. In a room that was more of a library than an office, at least in Stan's opinion, Alethea found a small notepad that she declared was good enough, along with something she called a pen that didn't look like any writing implement Stan had ever seen before. Yet when he set her on one of the chairs at the dining table, she began writing with it immediately, with no inkwell in sight. Yet another magical modern invention he had no hope of understanding. Each time she tore off a page, she'd hand it to him to stick in its proper place. On the coffee maker. On the stove. On the fridge, whatever that was. The freezer. The tap for water. The kettle. "I think the dishwasher might be a bit too complicated to explain on one sticky note. Maybe I'll just leave that until we fill it up or run out of plates and actually use it." Stan could barely believe what he was hearing. "There is a device that washes dishes for you?" "Yes, and one that washes clothes too. Even one that dries them, which has been a godsend here, where there's no space on the balcony for a clothesline. Not like where I used to live, where you could turn the whole wraparound veranda into your washing line, rain, hail, or shine. If only there was a device that could cook all your meals for you too, then women would never have to do any work in the kitchen ever again," Stan exclaimed. Alethea looked uncomfortable. "Well, Mum has something like that. A something mix, I think it's called. It's supposed to prepare and cook and stir your food, if you just put the right ingredients in. That's when Mum uses it, anyway. I'm not much of a cook, and the one time I tried it, it just kept beeping at me and telling me I'd made an error. I finally decided my only mistake was in thinking I could cook with it in the first place, so I ordered pizza. Which is probably what I'll do tonight too, unless you happen to have some amazing cooking skills you haven't yet told me about?" Now she looked hopeful. He hated to disappoint her. "I can make fish stew in a pot over the fire, mostly without burning it. I can catch and gut the fish too." She laughed. "That officially makes you a better cook than me." "You haven't tasted it." He couldn't remember the taste of it, either. He only knew that he'd choked it down because it was that or nothing, and he'd been so determined to live, to succeed, that he'd have done almost anything to ensure he did. And it still hadn't been enough. Carlton had killed him and married another man. What else could he have done that he hadn't already? "What do you mean?" Alethea asked, wrinkling her nose in confusion. Too late, Stan realized he'd spoken the words aloud. He opened his mouth to tell her it was nothing, and to forget what he'd said, but something told him Alethea's curiosity would not be so easily deflected. "Sure enough. You asked what else you could have done that you hadn't already. I can't answer you unless you tell me what you did, and why you did it. I still might not be any help, especially if it's to do with cooking, but at least I can try." She folded her arms across her chest, her mulish expression telling him he would not be able to disobey this order. "Now explain." Stan swallowed. Though Alethea looked nothing like his mother, he was reminded of that time he'd torn his trousers when she could ill afford to replace them. Size and strength meant nothing when a woman could inspire terror just with the tone of her voice. "I did everything I could to make myself a worthy husband for Carlton, and it was not enough," he said quietly. "Even cook and eat that foul fish stew for months while we were camping in Clarence Town. There was nothing I would not do, and yet everything I did was not enough to save her being married off to someone else. I was wondering what else I could have done to make her my wife." Alethea bit her lip and held out her hands to him. For a moment he hesitated before he took her small hands in his. Strong hands for all their softness and diminutive size. Then she looked up at him and he was caught in her gaze, a moth to her inexplicable inner flame. "I don't know why some relationships fail while others last for life. Why one person thinks another is their soulmate, when the other person has no feelings for the first at all. I can't speak for Carlton because I never met her. But I do know that sometimes two people aren't destined to be together, no matter how much one of them wishes it to be so. The guy stalking me is convinced we're soulmates, and I know we're not. There's nothing he can do to convince me. Maybe it's the same with you and Carlton." There was no spark. "But I never even got to find out. I never even got to speak to her," Stan said. "If I'd even had a chance to woo her for even a minute." "How could you possibly fall in love with someone you've never even spoken to?" Alethea asked. "I just knew. From the moment I saw her." Stan swallowed. That was why his heart leaped every time he looked at Alethea, because she looked so much like her. Even if she was softer. Alethea sighed. "Look, if this were a romance novel I'd believe you because love at first sight and insta love are definitely a thing in those, but even if those do exist in real life, it kind of has to be a two-way thing for it to actually work. I'll tell you what. I'll take another look into some of my more obscure sources after lunch, and see if there's anything I missed. Well, aside from the obvious of course." Stan hadn't understood half of what she'd said. "What's obvious?" he asked. "She married Sean Bell and they built Bell Cottage, which was later replaced by Bell House. Your Carlton and her husband were my many times great-grandparents. It's probably why I remind you of her." Stan reared back. "Carlton's granddaughter?" That made Alethea some sort of cousin. More distant than Carlton, but still family. Of course he had to protect her. "No matter what you find, I will protect you," he promised, knowing Carlton would approve. 28. Alethea woke up with her head resting on something harder than her usual pillow, though the warm blanket around her shoulders was delightfully soft. She blinked, then blinked some more before her mind managed to wrap around the reality. Sometime during the afternoon, Stan had joined her on the couch, and she was now using his chest for a pillow, while he draped his wings, which had magically reappeared, around her in a sort of leathery cocoon that made her envy caterpillars in a whole new way. The TV had turned itself off at some point. She probably should have told Stan how the remote control worked. Then again, she hadn't exactly expected to fall asleep on him and pin him to the couch for hours of boredom with nothing to watch. "What time is it?" she mumbled. "It is 6:35 in the evening, according to that clock." His voice rumbling in her ear sent shivers down her spine. If he'd added something about it being the perfect time for Netflix and chill, she'd straddle him in a heartbeat. Down girl, Alethea told herself. It had taken him hours to agree to share a couch with her. There was no way he was going to be amenable to hot sex anytime soon. Alethea sighed. "I should probably make dinner." "Ooh, no, I was going to order pizza, wasn't I? Can you grab my laptop?" Was she imagining it, or was he just as reluctant as she was to end their embrace? And that bulge in his jeans, no, she'd seen all of him last night. He was just naturally big, that was all. It didn't mean he was aching for sex as much as she was. "Are you sure I can't get you anything?" she asked as she hovered the cursor over the submit order button. "Demons don't need food." "Yeah, but don't you still want it though? I mean, the pizza place here is really good. Better than the one where I used to live. More pricey too, but it's worth every cent. Which is why I usually eat a slice or two more than I need, because it's just so good." Stan just shook his head, so she tapped the touchpad to place the order, then reached for the remote. "We have time for another episode before the pizza arrives if you want." Stan stared at her. "Why do you wish to watch something that will only put you to sleep?" Alethea couldn't remember the last time she'd fallen asleep in front of the TV, no matter what she'd been watching. It must have been the pain medication she took after lunch, which had already worn off, judging by the pain in her ankle when she moved. "It was the medicine I took that made me sleep. I'll stay awake whatever we watch, I swear." Sure enough, the episode's credits had just appeared when the intercom beeped to announce the pizza guy. "Can you press the button to open the gate?" Alethea asked. When Stan just stared at her in bewilderment, she said, "Here, just lift me up and carry me over to the door so I can show you." The poor pizza guy was peering at the video screen, probably cursing her silently for taking so long, if his deep frown was anything to go by. Feeling more like a fairy tale princess than herself, Alethea pressed the intercom button. "Hi. Buzzing you up now." A moment later, the pizza guy disappeared from the front steps. "More magic like your TV and your laptop?" Stan demanded. Alethea laughed softly. "Technology more than magic, but I understand it might seem like magic to you. This time, the camera is at the front door, and the picture comes direct to this little screen when you press the button. You should probably put me down so you can answer the door and have your hands free to take the pizza." The dining table please." By the time he'd helped her get plates and drinks out, a tentative knock sounded at the door. "What do I do?" Stan asked. "I do not wish to compromise you, but you cannot walk without my help." Alethea fought not to laugh. "Just open the door, take the boxes, thank the guy and close the door again. It'll be fine." "But do you not need to pay for your food? I have no coin from your time or mine." Poor Stan. She really wanted to hug him, but the 2 meters between them might have been the whole of Claysbrook Cove, too far for her to reach. "Don't worry, I've already paid." "How?" "Online credit card payment." At his look of confusion she added, "Magic." His frown only deepened. "I am not a fool. I know about credit." If Peel had not had good credit with his suppliers in Fremantle, he would have eaten a lot more fish stew with the rest of us, who had no such privileges granted to us. "Is it because you are Carline's granddaughter that shopkeepers give you credit?" The knocking came again, louder this time. "Pizza for Alethea Bell." "Just get the pizza please. I need food before I can properly explain the differences between Regency banking and how it works in the present day." Stan threw open the door, startling the pizza guy. "Is this Miss Bell's meal?" he demanded. Yeah." The pizza guy yanked the boxes out of the bag and thrust them at Stan's chest. "Have a good night, mate," he called over his shoulder as he bolted for the stairs. Stan stared at the boxes in his hands, then at the fleeing pizza guy. "If you have poisoned or cursed this food, I will hunt you down and see that you regret it." Stan called after him. "Stan, please close the door and bring those here. It's not poisoned or cursed, but he won't deliver here again if you threaten him like that. Then you'll have to go pick it up from the shop instead, or I will. And even when my ankle's healed, I'm not going to want to walk all that way in the dark just to get a pizza that'll be cold by the time I get home, and I happen to like their pizza." Grumbling under his breath, Stan obeyed, before planting himself on the dining chair across from her, arms folded across his chest, and a scowl so deep his eyebrows met across his nose. Alethea pulled out 2 slices and set them on a plate, then waved it before him. "If you could taste it, you'd understand." Stan sniffed. "It does smell delicious. There's still enough for you if you want it." But he just shook his head. "You're a stubborn demon, Stan, you know that? I bet you were a stubborn man too." A sudden thought popped into her head, and before she could properly consider the ramifications, she said, "So, what did you actually do to earn a place in hell anyway? It must have been pretty bad, to become a demon and all." Stan muttered something under his breath. The only words Alethea could hear were Steel and Carlton. "What was that? You tried to steal from Carlton? What did you steal from her? It must have been pretty valuable for her to want to kill you. Or to earn you a place in hell. I mean, trying to steal something isn't that bad. It's not like it's murder or... Oh shit. What if..." She had to choose her words carefully now. "Stan, did you do something to Carlton? Did you hurt her?" Stan's face had gone as pale as the pizza box. "I didn't. I never..." He clenched both hands into fists and punched at the wall. Alethea covered her head with her arms, expecting to be showered in plaster, but she didn't hear the impact. In fact, she didn't hear anything at all. When she raised her head, Stan was nowhere to be seen. 29. No. He'd never spoken to Carlton, let alone touched her. He'd never have hurt her. Never. He'd intended to steal her to keep her safe. Then what had he done to earn a place in hell? Why couldn't he remember? Was it because he'd done something horrible, something that would justify the fear he'd seen in Alethea's eyes when she asked him what he'd done? He was her protector, just as he'd wanted to be Carlton's. He would never have done something so terrible. Yet here he was, a demon. Stan was hardly aware of stepping through the wall until he stepped out of it again, into the next apartment. The Chinese woman who lived there had her back to him as she watched TV from her couch, the noise from the program drowning out any sound he made, but if she turned around, Stan slipped back inside the wall, his mind still whirling with thoughts he didn't want to have. He couldn't have. He wouldn't. He'd never. But the memories of that night didn't get any clearer. Finally, he blew out a breath. Whatever had happened that night, he couldn't change it. Carlton had killed him, and all he could do now was be the best protector possible, in the hope he might be able to claw his way out of hell. But to do that, he needed Alethea to trust him, not fear him. Stan burst out of the wall. Alethea was still sitting at the dining table where he'd left her, though the pizza on her plate was gone. He dropped to his knees beside her, seizing her hand in both of his. He thanked each and every deity in the universe that she didn't pull away, though her eyes widened in surprise. Surprise, not fear, he told himself, even if he didn't entirely believe it. "Alethea, I swear to you, my sole purpose here is to protect you. Whatever I may have done in the past to earn my place in hell, it is nothing compared to what I will do to anyone who threatens you. I never touched Carlton, nor did I do anything to hurt her. I only wish I knew why she killed me. You're the only person who can help me find out, and I beg you not to give up on me. I will protect you just as I promised, if you will only allow me to do so." Her eyes narrowed. "There's something you're not telling me, isn't there? I summoned you, which means there must be a way for me to dismiss you. To send you back to hell if I no longer need you." He hadn't known it before, but something inside him knew her words to be true. He bowed low over her hand, so low he could see the floor tiles between her fingers. "Please don't send me back. I need this chance to redeem myself. To show that I'm not entirely damned. That I can protect you just like I promised to. Please, Alethea, my mistress, I beg you. I will do anything you ask. Stan. She tugged on her hand, trying to free it from his grasp. He didn't dare let go. Please, he begged. Stan. It sounded more urgent now as she tugged harder. Will you get up off the floor, please? Only now did he realize she wasn't trying to pull her hand free but to pull him up. Tears streaked her cheeks, but she was smiling. I'm not sure I'd ever be mean enough to want to send someone to hell, let alone you, after all you've done for me. I've known you for less than a day, and I could totally see me getting used to having you around. I think this is the first day I haven't gone completely stir-crazy, stuck in this apartment alone, since the pandemic started. Now that's all on you. In fact, if it was up to me, I'd be happy to have you stay with me for as long as you'd like. No going back to hell at all. She fixed him in her gaze, and he could feel the bit hovering on the tip of her tongue. But you need to promise me that you will protect me, and that as long as you're around, I won't be in any danger from you. Stan's heart bloomed within his chest, almost like it was still beating, which he knew it wasn't. Alethea was the sweetest, kindest woman he'd ever met. Not to mention her beauty rivaled Carline's. He took her in from the graceful turn of her ankle up her shapely leg, so clearly outlined in her tight trousers, to the swell of her hips, curving all the way up to a pair of divine breasts big enough to spill out of his hands if he were ever blessed enough to hold them. Her lips slightly parted beneath wide questioning eyes as if poised to bestow a forbidden kiss. He'd give her 1,000 kisses if she only asked for them. And in that moment, he knew the sin that had sent him to hell. It was lust, pure and simple. He'd lusted after Carline from the moment he first saw her. Dreamed of her in his bed, or he in hers, claiming her for his own. Alethea, twin to Carline though 2 centuries separated them, aroused his lust every bit as much as Carline had. More maybe, for he'd touched Alethea, and every moment she was in his arms, the greater the temptation grew to caress her like a lover. To steal her for his bride, as he'd hoped to steal Carline. But he would not give in to temptation this time, Stan told himself. He would be a paragon of virtue instead of a lust-filled demon, and that was how he'd earn redemption. By protecting Alethea from everyone else, as well as himself. Stan? Answer me, please. Am I in danger with you? As unquenchable lust burned through his body, Stan stared up into her trusting eyes. No, he lied. 30. Would you like to watch some more TV? Stan asked. He looked proud of himself for remembering the correct words, and prouder still when he picked up the remote and managed to make the screen light up. Actually, I'd prefer to listen to an audiobook before bed. But if you want to watch something, you go ahead. If you have any questions about what you see, write them down and I'll try to answer them in the morning, Alethea said, pushing her notepad and a pen across the table at him. Stan frowned. What is an audiobook? A recording of someone reading the book aloud. My mum bought me the whole series in paperback for Christmas because some of the girls where she works were raving about it, but I saw it was available in audiobook, so I bought that to listen to. When I first started listening, I was at work and dug up something disturbing, so I haven't really gone back to it. But now I know you're the scariest thing in the cemetery and you're here protecting me, I might be brave enough to attempt it. She glanced over at the bench, but her phone wasn't on the charger. Damn, I must have left it in my pants pocket last night. Can you help me into the bedroom? I should be able to manage from there. Everything's only a short hop from the bed. His eyebrows shot up. You wish for me to carry you to bed? That voice again, like his thoughts were going exactly where hers were. If it's not too much trouble, Alethea said. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. Nothing you ask is too much trouble. I am yours to command. For a moment, she considered commanding him to join her in bed. No more than that though, because things had to have a sort of natural progression, not to mention consent. Not that she was going to say no if he suggested something. Here, he asked, setting her down on the end of the bed. Sure. Can you pass me the pants I was wearing yesterday? Yep, there was her phone all right, deep inside the hip pocket of her jeans. With a dead battery. Alethea swore. No audiobook for her tonight then. Can you help me put this on the charger? She considered trying to explain, but it'd be easier to show him. Carry me back to the kitchen for a moment. It wasn't until her phone was back on its charger and she was sitting on the bed that she realized reading the paperback was her only option now. She reached for the brick of a book. I can read to you if you wish. If he did it in that voice, no way was she going to turn him down. But it's a fantasy romance, Stan. You might not like it, she forced herself to admit. He drew himself up. An adventure where people bond together to forge deep relationships through their trials, on their way to a happy ending? What sort of person does not like reading such books? A Regency fan of romance. Well, that was a new one. If you're sure you don't mind. I read all manner of novels to my mother when she was alive. Every week, she wanted new books from the library. She liked Gothic novels the best, but she enjoyed romances too, and she said I had the best reading voice of anyone in my family. If he'd used that voice, Alethea wasn't surprised. Stan's mother was a lucky woman to have her own personal audiobook narrator on command, way back when. All right then. She held out a quart of thorns and roses. Stan settled into the chair beside the bed and began to read. 31. Just as he should not have joined her on the sofa earlier that afternoon, Stan knew it was a bad idea to stretch out on the bed beside Alethea as he read aloud to her. But the chair was uncomfortable and the bed was huge, and when he asked her if he might sit closer to her. Her eyes had lit up as she chirped, "Please do," before she plumped up the pillows for him, patting the spot where she wished him to sit. No, Stan did not have the fortitude to deny her. Especially when the bed was wide enough to keep a proper distance between them. Well, until she began to grow drowsy and cuddle up to him as she had on the couch. Even with a layer of blankets between them, blankets she lay beneath while he'd stretched out atop them, the warmth and softness of her body against his was intoxicating, heating him from the inside out, like he'd drunk an entire barrel of good Scottish whiskey. If he'd stolen Alethea as his bride instead of Carlton, and he'd spent their first day wooing her instead of resisting her, he knew their first night in bed together would not have ended with a barrier of blankets between them. No, he'd have coaxed Alethea out of her flimsy pajamas, stroked her all over, then rid himself of his borrowed trousers before plunging deep inside her. For this woman would welcome his attentions, if the way he'd wrapped her legs around his was any indication. Perhaps she sought such closeness because she was cold. If he could but start a fire in the grate to warm the room, then she would behave less like a wanton and more like the lady he'd promised to protect. Only there was no grate, or anywhere suitable to light a fire. There must be some technological marvel that heated the room if he only knew where to look, for while the weather in Western Australia was warmer than what he'd known in Scotland, the winters could still be cold. A sensible man, or at least one whose cock was not growing uncomfortably hard at the proximity of the beautiful woman wrapped around his leg, would wake her and ask. He would then obey her instructions so that he might heat the room, while she returned to her side of the bed, and he vacated the room entirely, leaving temptation behind him as she slipped back into slumber. Whereas a demon, one of hell's wickedest denizens, would take all that she offered, and push for more. He'd seduce her, drinking her pleasure as he satisfied his own, until she had no desire to banish him from her bed, let alone send him back to hell. Instead of begging, he should have. No. He was neither demon nor sensible man, but a lost soul who still hoped to attain heaven, where surely Carlton waited for him. which meant the pleasures of Alethea's body were not for him. All he was allowed to do was protect her, and protect her he would. He turned toward her instead of away, coaxing his wings into the world where they might be most useful. One slid beneath her, cupping her body and the blankets to keep all the warmth in, while the other fanned out on top of her and her coverings, enclosing Alethea like the precious pearl she was. His arms he kept ruthlessly fastened to his sides, no matter how much he wanted to reach for her. Thank God and the devil that demons did not sleep or dream, or he would likely have surrendered to his desire in the night, and done the unthinkable. As it was, he could only lay beside her, and found that the unthinkable made for very pleasant thoughts indeed. At least with his wings around her, no other man could get near her, he told himself. Mine, he growled at anyone who even thought to take her from him. 32. Alethea woke several times in the night, and each time she found herself wrapped securely in Stan's wings, just like he'd done on the couch. At some point, she'd thrown her leg over his, as if she'd seriously intended to straddle him. She edged back onto her side of the bed, hoping he hadn't noticed. But even with the roller shutters closed, her body clock and her smartwatch told her all too soon that it was morning and time to get up. "Come on, Stan, time to let me out of my cage, so I can have a shower," she said softly, pushing at the wing that pinned her to the bed. The membrane between the bone spurs was delicate and soft to the touch, but even if she tore through it, which she didn't dare do for surely that would hurt him, the bones that gave his wings shape were too thick and too close together to allow her to break free. "You don't need to protect me from the shower. Honest. The thermostat's not set hot enough for the hot water to burn me, so the worst I can do is cut myself shaving, which I'm not going to bother doing in winter when no one will see my legs anyway." Stan shifted irritably. "I am sure that is not a detail you should share with a man who is not your husband." Alethea grinned. "Oh, but oversharing is my thing. Besides, you're my demon protector, so you need to know as much about me as possible, the better to protect me. I should tell you about all the parts of me I shave, when I plan to go on a date with a man who might get to see them, if he's lucky." "There will be no such assignations while I am your protector," Stan grumbled, lifting his wing just a little. "Are you sure you wish to leave the warmth of your bed? It is cold, and I could not find the magical device you use to make a room warm in the place of a fire. The water in the shower will warm me up just fine. And when I get out, I can show you how to work the remote control for the air conditioning. Not that I use the heating function much in winter, it's mostly a summer thing. But if you're cold, I imagine it's much colder here than what you're used to in hell, so if you need the heater, we can turn it on." The wings vanished, as if they'd never existed. "I am not cold." She reached over and ran a hand down his rock-hard abs. "No, you're not cold. Rather hot, actually. In all senses of the word." The sudden desire to lick all the way down every ridge of the sexy demon's tummy meant there was probably something wrong with her, Alethea decided. Then again, now she was staring at the clearly defined bulge in the front of the demon's jeans, as if he was not just reading her thoughts but sharing them. "Oh hell!" Alethea swallowed as she dragged her eyes up to his face. His eyes were dark with desire. But desire for what? "Would you like me to assist you in the bathroom?" he rumbled in that voice. "Yes. Fuck yes." She wanted him to back her up against the shower wall and... She managed a weak smile. "I'm sure I'll be fine. My ankle hurts a bit less than yesterday, and the plastic stool's still in there if I need to sit down." Which she did, several minutes later when she was certain the cascade of the shower would hide any sounds she made. Sinking down on the little stool, her legs spread wide, her fingers drifted to where she ached for him in ways no sensible woman should ache for a demon. Alethea couldn't remember being this wet for a man who hadn't even touched her, yet the moment he used that voice, it was like her lady bits were desperately trying to dissolve her underwear to give him easier access. She rubbed herself, imagining that it was Stan's thick fingers and not her own, as her breath grew short, and the pleasure built until her orgasm came in a rush. Would it feel this good if Stan had stroked her, instead of having to do it all herself? Alethea closed her eyes. If Stan seduced her, she was willing to bet every orgasm would be 1,000, no, 1,000,000 times better than the pathetic ones she gave herself. If only. 33. When Monday morning dawned and Alethea's ankle still hurt too much to walk on, she called in sick to work and spent the week with Stan instead. The demon who was determined to protect her even from herself, it seemed, for no matter how dark his eyes grew or how much his jeans bulged, he rarely touched her except to carry her around the apartment, insisting that anything else would be unseemly or not appropriate, or some other word that belonged in a Regency novel and not in the mouth of a hot, shirtless man whose voice kept her in a perpetual state of arousal. It didn't help that he liked reading aloud to her, and would do so at the slightest excuse. And Alethea couldn't refuse. It was as if the sexiest audiobook narrator who'd ever lived had moved into her house, and she'd happily listen to him read the phone book until he was hoarse. Only she wanted to hear him read sex scenes, the really dirty kind. Actually, what she really wanted was for him to read and record them, so she could listen to them again when she was alone and. Only she was never alone, except in the bathroom, for Stan was never out of arm's reach. Half a dozen times she'd considered telling him to leave her alone, but it would be like kicking a puppy. A particularly creative puppy, who'd tried to cook dinner in the microwave for her in a metal pot. She'd been lucky the lightning show hadn't shut off the power or set off the smoke alarm. Well, at least she knew his cooking skills were about as bad as hers. The more time she spent with him, the more she wanted to be with him too. If she'd met Stan on that dating app and he'd asked her to meet up, she wouldn't have hesitated. And the first time she'd heard his voice, she definitely wouldn't have run away. She'd have wanted him to order everyone out of the restaurant, so he could bend her over the table and have his wicked way with her. Over and over and over again. She'd settle for the kitchen table here, but Stan's attention was on the TV, while she was trying unsuccessfully to find any other references to Carlton Steel. Burial records, property records, passenger lists, legal proceedings, official records. She swore she had the entire State Records Office collection of documents scanned into the work database from colonization to federation, but the only additional thing she'd managed to find was a newspaper announcement about her marriage to Sean Bell. Which was rather odd, she had to admit. She and Sean had lived exemplary lives if the records were to be believed, never getting into trouble with the law or having any legal entanglements with anyone else. Even the bushfire that had claimed their home of Bell Cottage hadn't swept through until 2 decades after her death. They'd never bought any more property than the original land grant they'd received surrounding Bell House and Bell Cottage, though their descendants had sold off a large chunk of the farmlands to developers over the years, the last of which was in Alethea's own lifetime, for a luxury seaside retirement village. The village was only in its final stages now, a sprawling sand-colored 2-story structure that mushroomed out of the bushland between Bell House and the sea, clearly visible from the western veranda of Bell House. The land had been sold on the condition that no development would exceed 2 stories, so as not to disrupt the visual amenity of Bell House. The developer had evidently missed that condition in the contracts he'd signed, and he'd spent years trying to fight it, first with the local government and then with the State Planning Commission, to no avail. There would be no high-rise developments between Bell House and the sea. Bell House and the surrounding lands were owned and managed by the Bell Family Trust, and administered by the same D'Angelo law firm that had set up the trust in the 19th century. All after Carline's time, bringing Alethea back to one big fat dead end. She blew out a breath. She wasn't sure which was more frustrating, her search for the woman who'd killed Stan or his strange sense of honor that kept his pants firmly fastened. "Is something the matter? Did you find something in your research about Carline?" Alethea looked up to find Stan's eyes fixed on her instead of on the paused TV screen behind him. He was watching Grease, one of Mum's favorites. If he liked that, maybe she should suggest Moulin Rouge next. Sure, she'd probably have to answer a fair few questions about it, but it'd be worth it for the moment he realized he was watching a movie about a brothel. What's wrong? She blinked. She'd better get her head out of the bordello and back into the present. But she couldn't seem to drag her gaze away from the TV screen without a twinge of envy. You know what I miss most about being stuck in this apartment? Well, aside from sunlight, which I wouldn't be seeing much of this week even without the roller shutters, because it's raining all week, but... Alethea coughed. Hell, her mind was wandering way too much lately. I miss dancing. My cousins and I used to order pizza for dinner, pile into the one car, drink a six-pack of beer between us on the way, and just spend the night dancing at a nightclub. Now I don't even know when nightclubs will be allowed to open again, or if it'll be safe to go there if they do. It's been a long time since I've gone dancing too, Stan said, looking wistful. Then let's do it. As soon as I can find somewhere that's open where dancing is allowed, let's go. Just you and me. Like a date, Alethea said. A date? He looked confused for a moment. Alethea took a deep breath, ready to explain. Oh, that's where a courting couple appear in public together, without a chaperone. For coffee or a meal or a movie like this. Stan waved at the TV screen. We could. The intercom interrupted to tell them that the grocery delivery had arrived, and Stan was soon too busy buzzing the delivery person up and doing his best not to threaten the man or accuse him of anything, before helping Alethea put everything away. By the time she was done explaining what the ready-made stir-fry, pasta and curry and rice packs actually were, and that she liked these strange foreign foods very much, it was time for dinner, and he almost exploded when she showed him the sushi she planned to eat, and that she would not allow him to protect her from eating seaweed and raw fish. Not that the smoked salmon was truly raw, but... When dinner was done, she was too tired to explain anything else, so she asked Stan to take her to bed and read to her. Which he was only too happy to do, so she was soon too distracted by him delivering the hero's lines in that voice as he got more and more intimate with the heroine, that she forgot all about dancing or dates or even Moulin Rouge. 34. That'd be the pizza, Alethea called. After a week of accepting grocery deliveries, she figured Stan could manage meeting the pizza guy without scaring the shit out of him again. Though if he did run into problems, now she'd bound her ankle up in the support bandage that had arrived in the most recent grocery delivery, she could probably hobble out there in time to help. It wasn't half as nice as being carried around by her demon protector, though. By the time she did reach the kitchen, Stan had a box in his hands and the pizza guy was gone. So everything went fine? Alethea asked. Stan stared at the box in his hands. He wanted to thank me. Apparently, they have a competition in the pizza store for the strangest thing to happen on a delivery. The winner gets free dinner. He delivered your order tonight in the hope that he could get a second free dinner. Alethea couldn't help but laugh. So did he get a second free dinner? Stan drew himself up. Not from me, he did not. I seized the box from him and slammed the door in his face before he could think to take it from me. This is your dinner, not his, and I told him so. Poor Stan. A week in the future and he still had a lot to learn. At least he hadn't scared off the pizza delivery guy. Alethea reached for the box. So should we eat? Stan lifted the box high above his head, out of her reach. Then he wrapped his other arm around her waist. Not until we get there. Then he whirled her around, wings flaring, and all Alethea could see for a long moment was darkness, until they popped out in the wintry night air, with Stan's wings flapping on either side of her. The road below was a long way down. Stan? The last time he'd flown with her, she'd been very drunk and in pain. She really wished he'd given her a chance to down a bottle or two of vodka before flying with him again. Worse, he was arrowing upwards, spiraling. Oh shit, she was going to be sick. Or not, as her feet touched a flat rooftop, high above the rest of the city. Alethea dropped to her knees, expecting to hit concrete, but instead she landed on a picnic blanket. She'd recognized that tartan pattern anywhere. Her mother brought this blanket to every picnic since forever. "Stan," she said, more softly, with a lot less panic than the first time. He spread his arms wide, and his wings fanned out behind him, making him look huge. "You said you wanted to go on a date, with dinner and dancing. We have pizza and beer and a space big enough to dance, though I may need your help with the music, as I don't know how to make it work." He set the pizza down on the blanket, beside. "Is that my laptop?" Right beside the portable speaker. She'd only used it in front of him once, while doing some research, and there'd been a video she'd wanted to show him, in case it jogged his memory, but it hadn't. "You should probably eat first, before the pizza gets cold." He'd stopped calling pizza one of her strange foreign foods, but he still eyed it suspiciously as she took a slice. Alethea smothered a smile. You could take the Regency man out of the past, but you couldn't make him eat in the present. Pity. He'd probably like pizza, if he ever actually tasted it. "I'm not sure I should have much of the beer. I'm unsteady enough on my feet as it is. Dancing drunk will probably end with me twisting my other ankle, so I can't walk at all. Trust me. I won't let you fall." Even as the logical part of her screamed that Stan was a demon, therefore this had to be a lie, she believed him. "So how do we do this?" she asked, looking up at him. "Well, if you will make your laptop play the right music." "Oh. Right." Alethea opened her laptop. And the right music would be. She was pretty sure she had a playlist with the Time Warp, the Macarena, YMCA and Single Ladies on here somewhere, but she didn't think Stan would know the right moves for any of them. Stan blushed. He actually blushed. "I only know one dance. We learned all of them at school because some of the students were minor gentry who might need them one day, but I only remembered the one, because it was the one that I hoped one day I'd get to dance with, the woman I'd marry." Worried she'd have to scour the internet for Mozart or Beethoven or worse, she raised her eyebrows. "So what's the name of this magical courting dance you dreamed of doing?" Silently, she begged whatever powers of the universe that were listening, that it would be something she'd at least heard of. "It's scandalous. It's probably too forward of me to ask you to dance it with me, but after the films I saw on your TV, I hoped—" "Unless it's a naked conga line with a bunch of strangers, I'm pretty sure I'll agree to it, Stan," Alethea said. He straightened his shoulders and raised his head. Almost defiant. Like a man a head taller than her and built like he was actually feared her reaction. "All right. I would like to dance the waltz with you." Alethea almost laughed. Even she knew the steps for that one. "Strauss it is then." Stan looked confused. "Who?" Alethea just shook her head and clicked on the first version she found. She cranked up the volume on the tiny portable speaker as high as it would go, then hit play. She clambered to her feet, trying to remember where she was supposed to put her hands. Stan didn't help, he just circled his arm around her waist and lifted her off her feet, while his other hand closed around hers. He waited a moment for the introduction to play, before he was off, whirling her around the roof without her feet ever touching it. It was almost like flying. Well, it almost was, given his wings were extended and it was just her and him, spinning under the stars. She laughed aloud for the sheer joy of it. They were up so high there was nothing but stars above in the clear winter sky. And Stan's eyes glittering in the reflected light from the city below. "Oh Stan, this is magical. Wonderful. Perfect." All superlatives that never left her lips because she was too busy wetting them, as Stan's gaze stole her attention from everything else. She stretched up, pressing her body along his as she looped her arms around his neck. Then she pressed her lips to his. An instant later, Stan leaned in to return her kiss and the world stood still. The demon of her desire kissed like he meant to steal her soul through her lips, and she would surrender it willingly if he would only continue to kiss her. Just like that. Oh yes. An eternity passed, or perhaps it was only a moment, but she knew they'd shared 100 kisses, and she'd trade everything she owned for 100 more. No, for even one more, for he was the devil's own temptation and she was falling for him so fast nothing could stop her. The screech of a car alarm far below broke the spell. Alethea blinked her eyes open to find she'd wrapped not only her arms but her legs around Stan so that the mighty bulge in his pants nestled in the perfect place between her thighs, and instead of holding her around the middle, his hands cupped her ass as though with one mighty thrust he meant to tear through his jeans and hers and impale her. Yes, she breathed, tightening her hold on him. His enormous wings flapped, lifting them into the air. I need to take you to bed, he growled, then dived. 35. He set Alethea on her bed, prying her limbs loose from around him so that he could go back for her things. Only to realize there was someone hammering on the front door of her apartment. A delivery of some sort, Stan assumed, as he marched to accept it. He threw open the door and found a man he'd never seen before standing there. Well, what have you brought her? He asked. The man's eyes widened. I didn't bring anything. I came to talk to Alethea. Is she home? Who are you and what business is it of yours? Stan wasn't sure whether he wanted to embrace the man for stopping him from ravishing Alethea, or knock him down for the interruption. Madness gripped him and it had dug its claws into Alethea too, for surely no sane woman would do such a thing during a waltz. I'm Bigger. Her boyfriend. Who are you? The man stuck his chin out aggressively. If he did not have such a weak chin, it might have been impressive. A boyfriend? Stan had never heard of such a thing. Alethea. There is a boy here who claims to be your friend. Is it true? Alethea limped into the dining room. A boy who, no, I don't have Bigger. What are you doing here? How did you get through the security gates? You shouldn't even be here. How did you get my address? Dread curdled in Stan's stomach, or it would have if he still had a stomach. He wasn't sure he did. You are the one who stalks her, though you have no permission to court her? Begone and never return. If you so much as try to speak to her again, it will be the last thing you ever do. The boy trembled with fear, but he had courage. Stan had to give him that. Alethea, are you all right? Did he hurt you? Begone or I shall hurt you. Stan roared. The boy nearly tripped over his own feet, he bolted so fast down the corridor. Stan glared at him until he rounded the corner to the stairwell and vanished from sight. Only then did he slam the door behind him and lock it. He will not return, Stan said with considerable satisfaction. See? I will protect you just like I promised. And he would not take her to bed, no matter how much he longed for her. Alethea offered him a small smile. Thanks, Stan. She limped back from whence she'd come. I will go and fetch your things from the rooftop. Then if you wish I will read aloud to you, Stan said. He would also take a moment to scour the surrounding streets, to make sure her stalker truly had departed. Sure. But by the time he returned, her even breathing beneath the covers told him she was already asleep, with no need for his help. So he did what he did best, he sat in the chair beside her bed and watched over her to keep her safe. From both that boy and his own traitorous body. It wasn't until much later that he realized that when he'd threatened the boy, he'd sounded exactly like William, when he'd warned Stan away from Carlton. But it wasn't the same, he told himself. He was protecting Alethea. Why, that boy was the reason she'd summoned Stan to be her protector in the first place. Whereas William. If Carline's brother had not been such an insufferable prig, Stan might have been able to court her properly, so that she might have married him instead of some other man, and Alethea. Alethea would not exist, because she was the granddaughter of the other man Carline had married. And the world would be a far poorer place for it. A future without Alethea in it, he didn't dare consider it. Wouldn't allow it to happen because he was her protector, and he would protect her from everything and everyone who even thought to harm her. Because she was his to protect and no one else's. 36. On Sunday night, when she was still limping around the house, Alethea called Jeremy. She didn't want another week off sick, but there was no way she'd make it down the stairs, let alone all the way to the dig site. Sorry to bother you so late, but I figured you'd want an update. My ankle's still making my life hell, so, she began. Good. Well, not good, but that solves a problem for me. With the wet weather last week, everyone had time to catch up on documentation, so everyone's catalogued their finds properly before we return to site tomorrow, along with the fine weather. What I need is someone to start writing the report. And if you're stuck working from home for another week, then I choose you. He coughed. If you need further encouragement, I can throw in a day's pay to work on your thesis, because I know you wanted to finish off your lit review. 4 days of project work and 1 on your thesis. Alethea blinked. That was almost too good to refuse. Why me? Jeremy made a sound in the back of his throat that sounded almost like a growl. Nothing like Stan, of course, but still. Our Kimberley team, which were working in the Northern Territory last week, are stuck in Kununurra for 2 weeks in quarantine before they're allowed to go to site. So I had to send some of our Perth staff up to break ground on the project while we're waiting for the proper team to be released, so they can take up the reins. Which means we're short-staffed here and the crew in Kununurra have their own reports to write, so you are my last best hope. I will even hand-deliver a bulk pack of toilet paper to your house, if it'll sweeten the deal. Alethea had to laugh at that. Who'd have thought you could bribe someone with toilet paper, until there was none to be had, of course. I'm good for toilet paper. Thanks to Mum, who'd signed up for some sort of charity delivery service for the stuff. But if you'll let me work from home this week, that would work really well. Plus, I'm supposed to give a talk on my lit review at uni in a couple of weeks. Now they've rescheduled it and confirmed a date, so a day to start preparation on that would be nice. It's a deal. Talk to Justin in the office to make sure you have access to all the project files you need. He cleared his throat. I have to go. It's feeding time and baby bolognese is his favorite at the moment. Jeremy's 6-month-old son was definitely a handful, one he'd need both hands for. Talk to you later then, Jeremy, and good luck. She ended the call to find Stan staring at her. What? You say some very strange things that I struggle to understand. Why must you talk about a light review, and how far must you travel in order to reach uni? There was no place of that name in the colony in my time. A lit review is short for literature review. It's a report on my research from written sources. So the stuff I've found out by looking at the research that's been done before we started the excavation here at the cemetery. It's definitely not a light review. It's rather deep, quite the opposite. And uni, that's short for university. I'm doing my Doctor of Philosophy on our findings from the cemetery excavation, so I'll have to write a complete research thesis in 3 years' time and likely some scholarly papers in between, but it's customary to update your research colleagues on how your project is going at certain stages, and I was supposed to do my presentation in April with everyone else, but the event got cancelled because of the pandemic, and the restrictions have only just lifted enough for it to be rescheduled now. And as I still haven't presented, I have to go up on stage and present my research, or what the client will allow from my research, to the staff and students at the university. You are a scholar? And you will present your findings to the important men of your university? That is truly remarkable, Stan said. Alethea coughed out a laugh. The important women too. The faculty's a pretty good split between men and women now, and students, well, I think last time they checked, the women outnumbered the men, but not by many. So it's entirely possible I'll present my findings to as many men as women, or even more women than men. Stan just shook his head. Remarkable. I can scarcely believe that women are allowed to be educated and be responsible for educating others? Alethea finished for him, ready to defend her choices and the centuries of feminism that separated her from him. Know that you are a lady scholar. I should have guessed, with your thirst for research on your laptop, as you help me find out more about Carlton, that it is not just a hobby but a vocation for a lady in your time. I mean, a wife helping her husband with his studies, I understand, but a young lady who is not yet married, I'm sure when you do marry your husband will not allow. Shut up. Right there. Stan's mouth gaped open in shock. If I marry anyone, and I may never, which is absolutely fine in this day and age, he will not allow or forbid me to do anything. This is the 21st century, and any man who thinks women exist only to further their own ambition, don't deserve any woman's attention, ever. She tapped her finger on Stan's chest. If you want to survive in this time, you better remember that. Women are people as much as any man, and we make our own choices. Any man who tries to say otherwise should be gagged by his own testicles. She backed up and had to hide a smile as Stan cast a worried glance at his own unharmed groin. When I give my presentation at the university, you're going to come with me. You're going to be a good protector who watches and listens to everything without saying a word, unless my life is in danger. Then maybe you'll learn a bit more about the future you've arrived in, because you'll never fit in with the people today if you can't accept women as equal to men. In fact, it might be kinder to send you back to where you came from, rather than watch you struggle. Especially as you've scared my stalker away. That is not what I meant, mistress. I was only a farm boy, not a scholar or a politician, with a silver tongue to smooth away the roughness of my words. I barely understood the betters of my own time, and those of yours, yourself included obviously, confound me completely. I am not entirely stupid, or at least I do not mean to be. Please educate me. Help me to understand. As a scholar, you are more qualified than anyone else to teach me how to behave as I must in your time. Do not send me back. I will not fail you. I promise. Oh hell, if she met his gaze, she was going to cry. She'd almost kicked the puppy. A 6-foot rock-hard, muscled and winged wall of a puppy who could melt her knickers off with a single sentence spoken in that voice, but... Of course I'll help you, Stan. That's what I promised. You've held up your part of the bargain, and I'd be a horrible bitch if I didn't hold up mine. He gasped. You cannot say that about yourself. I mean, that is, I would never. Relax, Stan. I mean, your job just got easier. My boss is letting me work from home next week, so you can protect me from right here inside this apartment, where you can hide from the sun. I'm not hiding. No, he wasn't. Not really. Which is why you'll come to my presentation at the university. At least I'll know one friendly face in the crowd. He ducked his head. Will they allow me to enter? I am no scholar, and my learning was limited to the village school. Surely such eminent scholars will know I do not belong among them. Universities and schools had changed a lot in 200 years, and she suspected she'd enjoy Stan's surprise when he found that out. As long as you're wearing pants, a shirt and some shoes and keep your mouth shut, they won't suspect a thing, Alethea said. She hoped not, anyway. And if they did, she'd just tell them he was her boyfriend, and she'd brought him along for moral support because she was nervous. Because no matter how prepared she'd be, that part would definitely be true. 37. And we're really looking forward to what we might find hidden beneath the sands of East Perth cemeteries, Alethea finished, tapping the cursor one last time to show the final slide in her presentation before she read it aloud. Questions? Usually at least one of her cousins, if not all of them, would have squeezed into the audience and stuck their hands up to ask questions she'd rehearsed beforehand. But Tacy was working, Octavia was up north at a minisite somewhere, and Callie was at a family wedding. Someone from her dad's side of the family, not the Bell side, which was why Callie was the only one of them who'd been invited. And while Stan would be in the audience, the only sound he made was applause as he shook his head. He had no questions for her. Okay, I'll change that bit in the beginning to say the first known burial because, like you said, there were undocumented burials as well as those that were sort of documented, but not well enough to be sure where the bodies were buried. Alethea tapped at her keyboard a moment, until she was satisfied with the new slide. Oh, and then I need to add a bit in that slide on what we hope to find, because the records aren't complete. Which sets the scene for the empty graves we found that I can't talk about because of the non-disclosure agreement with the developer. But which I will have to include in my thesis, whether the developer likes it or not. Are all scholarly talks so entertaining? I could listen to you lecture for hours, Stan said. Alethea laughed. Hell no. I mean, I started out in medicine because that's what my family wanted me to study, and I figured, seeing as I'd gotten into the course, I should at least give it a try, and then I fell asleep in a lecture on cell biology. More than one, actually. It wasn't even all that boring, but the lecturer had this monotone voice that had this almost magical power to put you to sleep after listening to him for a few minutes. Unlike your voice, which I could listen to all night. Stan preened at the compliment. Do you wish for me to read to you again tonight? All night, every night. He'd finished with the fantasy romance series, and was now working his way through Mum's extensive collection of steamy paranormal and sci-fi romance. Once he'd stopped stumbling over the sex scenes and really gotten into the swing of things, he had become, hands down, her favorite audiobook narrator ever. She should try to record him one day. Yes please Stan, she said, slamming her laptop shut. The presentation was tomorrow and it was ready to go. She deserved a night off. Her pajamas were in the wash after she'd spilled coffee down the front of them. Okay, technically she'd spat coffee down the front of them when Stan, surprised by the toaster popping, had actually jumped so high off the ground he'd clunked his head on the ceiling. Watching him flap around trying to free his horns from the light fitting had sent her into fits of laughter, and the coffee had just been a casualty really. Much like the poor light fitting, which now had 2 horn-sized holes in it that she wasn't looking forward to explaining to her parents when they got home. Which meant she'd be wearing one of the oversized t-shirts she used as nightgowns in summer to bed. They were also easier access when she grew too hot and bothered by Stan's reading and had to escape for a bathroom break, where she'd only have a few minutes to take care of herself before returning to bed and Stan's watchful gaze. For a moment she imagined touching herself while he watched, his gaze heating to smoldering as her pleasure grew, until he offered to. Are you ready for me? He usually gave her a moment to get changed and slide under the covers, before he came into her bedroom. Some bullshit about propriety or whatever. Well, he didn't see it as bullshit, he was protecting her, or so he said. One sec. She stripped off her clothes, dragged on a nightie and crawled into bed. Okay. In he came, book clutched to his bare chest, with an eager smile on his face as if he wanted to know what happened as much as she did. He surely wasn't hanging out for the super sexy bits, even if he did read them so well. Stan settled in the chair today instead of the other side of the bed, as if he'd read her thoughts and felt it best to put a safe distance between them. One thing she'd learned in this pandemic was that social distancing sucked when you wanted to be closer to someone. He started to read, for which he always used that voice, and Alethea closed her eyes, savoring every word. Surprisingly early in the book, the couple's clothes started to come off, and Stan's voice lingered on words like nipple and peak and mound, savoring phrases like wet heat and tight sheath until Alethea's lady bits ached for attention. Surely Stan wouldn't notice if she just slipped a hand between her thighs and... 38. Every night she did this, though she tried to hide it. When the book turned steamy, she began to squirm until finally she gave in and pleasured herself. Usually, she fled to the bathroom, hiding it from him, but now he could see her hand slide down her body between her legs. He might not be able to ravish her completely, but he'd be damned if he'd watch and do nothing. Why the heroes of her favorite books would never stand by and watch, when they might replace her hand with their own. Whereas he was here in her bedchamber, as real as Alethea herself. Every bit as capable of bringing her pleasure as the imaginary men in her books. More so, for he was here. Of course he'd need to know what she liked first, but he was willing to find out. 39. Do you like that? Alethea froze. He was staring at her now, and she didn't dare move her hand lest she draw his attention to where it was. Do I like what? She asked carefully. He waved at the pages of the open book in his lap. All this biting and sucking and thrusting fingers into places. Ah yeah, or she wouldn't be inches away from pleasuring herself to the sound of his voice. Does a lady's secret place truly taste as delicious as these men say? Alethea couldn't stifle the snort of laughter that escaped. Well, all the book heroes seem to think so. I wouldn't know. I've never given oral sex to a woman before. And before you ask, no man has ever gone down on me, so I don't know what I taste like either. Men taste like eggplant or zucchini when they come, and while I don't mind my veggies, I'm not really a fan of the taste during sex. Have you ever gone down on a woman? What did it taste like? His eyes widened. Me? I've never done such a thing. Taken my tongue to a lady's secret place. Yet these ladies seem to receive so much pleasure from it. Alethea laughed. Well yeah. Most guys can't make a girl come with just their dick. They need to work for it. I mean, that's the holy grail for a girl, isn't it? Getting a guy who can give good dick. Callie's convinced they're about as rare as unicorns, and she's never met one. Whereas a guy who gives good oral or is good with his hands shows he at least knows where a girl's clit is, so it's worth a shot. What in heaven's name is a clit, and what is so important about it? Alethea closed her eyes. Any normal man, she'd be torn between kicking him out of her bedroom for sheer ignorance, or inviting him to take a look. With Stan, every bit of her body was screaming for her to invite him. Then he'd say that would be unseemly or improper, or one of another maddening Regency words that made her want to scream. I think Mum might have an anatomy textbook in the office I could show you, she said, flipping the quilt to one side so she could climb out of bed. Only to find Stan kneeling on the floor beside the bed, blocking her way. He carefully placed his hand on her knee before he looked up at her with smoldering puppy dog eyes. Would you show me? Please? That voice said. A sensible girl would have swept him aside and walked past him to get that textbook. Alethea shimmied out of her knickers and dropped them on the floor quickly, hoping he wouldn't notice how soaking wet they were. Then she slid up the bed until her back hit the headboard. You want to see my? Now who was having trouble getting the words out? She'd be damned before she called any bit of her body a secret place though. His cheeks reddened. I wish not only to see but to taste. For you are sweetness itself, and I cannot imagine you being anything but delicious. He flicked his tongue out, and it looked longer than it should be. Like it belonged to a demon, a monster, instead of a man. As if the wings and horns and claws weren't a dead giveaway. Claws that were now resting on both her knees, pushing her legs apart oh so slowly. His eyes begged her. Blue eyes only a shade darker than her own. How had she not known he had blue eyes before? The eyes of a man, not a monster. He lifted her legs over his shoulders, his eyes never once leaving hers, as he crawled onto the bed. Then he began to trace her folds with his finger. Softly, so softly it tickled, and she squirmed under his touch, wanting more that she couldn't seem to bring herself to ask for. Your lower lips are wet. So very wet, just like the ladies in your books. Ready to be fucked, is that not what their lovers say? Slowly, Alethea nodded. If he'd only take his jeans off. But first I must find this clit. A pearl, a bundle of nerves, a nub. Ah, your books have so many words for this mysterious part of yours. Something to be bitten and sucked and circled, so sensitive that the merest touch, ah. He'd found it all right. He knew it too, stroking her lightly at first to gauge her reaction, then harder, until she felt her back beginning to arch, pushing her hips toward him, offering more of herself. All of herself. This gives you pleasure, she heard him say as her vision began to blur. She was so close. Yes, she panted, desperate for him to continue. To give her the release she craved. Oh yes. But all the books say I must push my fingers inside you. His finger stroked down deep inside her before he joined it with a second, then a third. His fingers were thicker than most men's cocks, and she liked the feel of them inside her. If only he'd stroke her clit again. Just once would be enough to. And I must hook them like this? She wasn't sure how, but Stan had found some spot inside her that was almost as sensitive as her clit, and he knew that too, for his eyes drank in her expression, her reaction, her every panting breath as she arched her back higher. Please, oh please, she begged. So if I stroke you in both places at once. His fingers worked their magic inside her as his thumb circled her clit. Once. Twice. Alethea screamed. When her wavering vision returned, all she could see was Stan sucking on his claws, one at a time, with a big grin on his face. Sweet indeed, but I suspect you will taste sweeter still when it is not my fingers making you scream, but my tongue. He did not wait for permission, and she was too hoarse to give it, but her back had barely come to rest fully on the bed again when she arched up so that she could grab hold of his horns and grind herself against his wicked, wicked mouth. Oh God, she wasn't sure what he was doing with his tongue, for it seemed to be everywhere all at once, even as he sucked on her clit, but she was falling fast. For a man who didn't even know what a clit was an hour ago, he sure was the master of hers. Of her whole body at this rate, as she thrust her hips higher, locking her ankles around his neck to keep him close. Then his fangs grazed against her and she was flying blind, wrapped in his wings with his tongue buried deep inside her, stroking places no one else had ever touched. She whimpered as he let her down, his tongue gliding out of her in one long lick that circled her clit one last time before abandoning her. Even after he released her legs, setting them on the mattress, she couldn't seem to bring herself to close them. She should clean up, find her knickers, put them back on. But first she wanted more. Please don't stop, Stan. I want more. I want all of you, she begged. When he didn't seem to understand, she reached for his pants. His eyes widened. No. Do not tempt me. He turned away and marched out of the room, his wings sending a cold blast of air right into her superheated core, the opposite of what she wanted. Stan, wait. But he did not return. 40. Stan buried his face in his hands. He should not have done it. Should not have asked her. Should not have touched her. Should not have stroked her until she'd let out that first joyful scream. Should not have enjoyed it so much he'd wanted to do it all over again, before devouring her like some maddened animal until she'd screamed his name, then offered herself up for more. His trousers were so tight with his arousal, if she'd managed to touch him through them, he was certain he'd burst. Or the trousers would, which would be just as bad, for then there'd be nothing between him and her hot, wet, tight. Oh God, he wanted her so much. He was her protector, not her ravisher. Those little mewling noises she made when she was about to reach the peak of her pleasure. He was her protector. He should be saving his claws for ripping out the throats of anyone who threatened her, not raking them gently along the wet walls of her most secret place as she wreathed beneath him in unabashed pleasure. His horns were for gouging out the eyes of those who looked at her wrong, not for her to wrap her fingers around as she guided his face between her thighs, so that he might drink her sweetness from the source. He'd even wrapped his tail around her ankles, holding her to him, so that she could not close her legs as he devoured her, taking her with his tongue as he dared not do with his cock. He was her protector. He should not be having such thoughts about returning to her bedchamber, spreading her legs wide and burying himself inside her so deep he would not know where he ended and she began. And then making her scream not once but over and over again until she was so drunk on pleasure she could no longer move from the bed until he lifted her from it, carrying her in his arms just as he had the first week they'd met. Stan turned on the water in the sink, setting it as cold as it would go, before freeing his cock to thrust it into the icy hell spurting from the spout. He was her protector. He deserved this punishment, this chill, for to accept the bliss that she offered so willingly was to accept his place in hell. For if he ravished her, even if she wished it, he would no longer be her protector. He would be just another demon, and he'd likely be sent straight back to hell, where he belonged. "What are you doing?" She stood in the doorway staring at him, still wearing nothing but a short nightgown that did little to hide her bare legs, or the temptation that lay between them. "Trying to cool my blood," he said. Though he wasn't sure if he had blood. His cock didn't ache quite as much though. Maybe the cold water had dulled his arousal, or perhaps it had turned him numb. "I could have taken care of you. Could still take care of you if you wish. Women can give head too, you know." Stan shook his head. "And it tastes like eggplant," you said. If anything, it cooled his ardor further. She laughed softly. "Well, one guy did. I never did it again. Maybe demons taste different. I'd be willing to try. It's only fair after you, and I would have, but why didn't you?" There were tears in her eyes, he saw now. He'd hurt her somehow. Perhaps not physically but emotionally. Maybe. To lie with you would be a sin. One that would damn my soul forever. I am a demon now, but as your protector, I believe I have been given a chance to do better. To change the fate of my soul. So to take what you offer without marrying you would condemn me to hell, and possibly you as well. Some protector that would make me. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "I'm still not sure I believe in any of that, but I gather you do, and seeing as you're actually a demon, maybe I should believe in at least some of it. I still don't see how me giving you a blowjob is bad and what you did isn't, because I can tell you, there was nothing bad about any of that. If you learned all that from books, you are one hell of a scholar. And I can say that as a student myself whose mind and body you just blew. Wow, Stan. Just wow. I am a terrible protector. I don't know why you don't just send me back to hell right now." She took a step closer. "Do you want to go back?" "No. I never want to go back. I want to redeem myself. Maybe earn a place in the other place, where I will see Carline again." Sadness slumped her shoulders at the mention of Carline. "I wish I'd been able to find out more about her. There's so little about the women of the early colony, and even less about her in particular. Maybe if there is an afterlife and you do see her in it, you can ask her why she did what she did. Then maybe you could have some closure. Or maybe you could offer to do to her what you just did to me, and she's sure to forgive you almost anything after that. Though sex probably isn't a thing in heaven, so maybe not." Stan should have been thinking of Carline. He should have been listening to what Alethea was saying, but he could not shake the image that came to mind, of her, lying on the bed before him, begging until he gave her exactly what she wanted. What they both wanted. But it wasn't Carlton on the bed. He could not even remember her voice or what she looked like. No, all he could see was Alethea, hear her voice, begging him for more. Would it be so bad to surrender to temptation, if it meant he could stay here for Alethea's lifetime? He'd never see the sun again, but he would trade that for spending every night in her bed. Every night inside her, granting her every desire. Better than heaven, surely. But was one short lifetime of pleasure worth spending eternity afterward in hell? He wished he knew. If only he remembered just how bad hell was, then he would know for sure what to choose. One thing was certain: if he had to choose between Carlton and Alethea, the ghost of his past or the glorious soft sweetness beckoning him in the present, he knew exactly what he wanted. Would you come to bed? Just to hold me in your wings again. I'll put my knickers back on and you can button your pants back up. So we don't tempt each other again. Nothing would stop her from tempting him. One look, one touch, and he'd never forget her taste. But he could resist temptation. He'd done it before. He could do it again. Stan nodded and followed her to bed. 41. Alethea delivered her speech perfectly, to the applause of everyone present. True to his word, Stan had not said a word to anyone since they'd arrived in the lecture theatre, but he'd surveyed the crowd, watching for any danger to her. He might not be a very good protector, particularly with all the mistakes he'd made last night, but he intended to do his best to make up for those mistakes now. Of course, watching the crowd only made him want to talk more, because what he saw, more than anything now, he understood why he needed to protect her. Alethea was important in a way he hadn't even begun to understand, while it had been just the two of them in her parents' apartment. In this crowd, it all made sense. When the speakers trooped down from the stage to the table where tea and coffee was served, Stan made sure he reached Alethea first. I know you said I shouldn't say anything, but I need to tell you something. Something important. Is my life in danger? She asked. No, but... She relaxed. All right then. What is it? That was amazing. Magnificent. Did you know you managed to hold the attention of every single person in the room, from the moment you began speaking, to the very end? No one else tonight managed that. I think one man even fell asleep, but he woke up for your talk. I didn't understand it before because I've never seen you outside the apartment, but you truly are a scholar and a teacher. Not just because of how much you love research, though I've seen your love for that too, while you've been helping me and working on your report on the cemetery. It's the way you tell a story, almost like magic. There's something spellbinding about you when you speak. If I were your husband... Stan, she warned. If you're going to start talking shit again, you can go stand outside until it's time to leave. If she banished him to stand outside, it would be worth it, just to tell her. If I were your husband, I would never allow you to stop being a scholar, your whole life long, even if I had to fight every man and woman in the university to make it so. You are remarkable, and these people are lucky to be allowed to work alongside you. He bowed deeply. I will see myself out, and I will wait for you outside all night if that is your wish. Then he turned to go. Uncle Stanley? There was a man staring at him. A man who looked older than he was, which made no sense, for he could not possibly be this man's uncle. The man grinned. It is you, I'm certain of it. You're Stanley Steel, my mother's brother, my Uncle Stanley. I'm Dunstan Stone, your oldest nephew. We received your letter telling us to come to Clarence Town to meet Mr. Peel and nothing after that, but we came out here anyway as soon as we could. That is a whole story in itself, but I won't bore you with the details. Not yet, at least until you've told us what happened to you and how you're here now. You must come for coffee at Anemone's place. I insist. Stan? Alethea's worried face appeared at his elbow. Do you know this man? Stan looked from her to the man. What had he said his name was? Dunstan? It seemed faintly familiar, but Stan was certain he'd never seen this man before in his life. He says he's my nephew, Stan said helplessly. It couldn't be true. Any nephews he'd had would have to be more than a century old. Long dead, just like him. You were asking questions about one of your ancestors, Alethea said slowly. Dunstan seized Stan's arm. This man, Stanley Steel. My uncle, he said proudly. You must come to my wife's house for coffee when this is over. A curly-haired pregnant woman appeared at his side. His wife, Stan presumed. Dunstan, you can't just invite strangers over in the middle of the night. Maybe we should go to a cafe instead. Tacy's place will still be open. We could go there. She might even have some muffins left. You know Tacy? Alethea asked. The woman laughed. Of course. My place is across the road from her cafe, and I live on her muffins. Even more now I'm eating for two. She patted her belly, as if she was perfectly happy to announce her condition to everyone in the room. Stan opened his mouth to ask her how she could be so bold about something so. Alethea jumped in. Tacy's my cousin. If you're a friend of hers, I'm sure we'll be perfectly safe with you. Lead the way. Stan closed his mouth and followed the woman. 42. The lights were still on at the shut-up cafe, but the closed sign was clearly visible on the door as they walked past on their way to Anemone's apartment. Tacy was nowhere to be seen, probably in the kitchen, doing the washing up, Alethea decided. Good thing they'd agreed to go to this woman's house, before Stan could put his foot in his mouth and say something he shouldn't. Stay quiet, she hissed at him as Anemone stepped inside foyer. Someone behind her guffawed. Why, do you think he's going to give away that he's over 200 years old if he isn't quiet? Like Dunstan or Torsten could blend in for more than 5 minutes, You'll fit right in, Uncle Stan. Alethea turned to find a whole group of people following behind them. Who are you? She asked, bewildered. The man closest behind her bowed. I am Ben Stone, the youngest brother, and I'm an artist. Most well known for my gargoyle cartoons, where a centuries-old gargoyle wakes up in the present day with a wicked case of caffeine withdrawal and takes up residence at a coffee shop. I'm on all the socials. Viral like you wouldn't believe. And when I'm not drawing, you'll find me having hot, hard, heavy monster sex with the lovely Rochelle here. He pulled a protesting girl into his arms and bent her over for a showy kiss. You can't tell people that, she scolded when he released her. Why? This is my uncle, and there's no way he can be alive without some supernatural assistance. Right, Uncle Stan? Get inside before someone hears you and we get a new media circus camped on our doorstep in the morning, looking for the Mothman again, a new woman hissed, shoving Ben toward the door. In the light, Alethea recognized Katina. If they do, call me. I had the most wicked suit made and it arrived a few days ago. I'll put it on and give your press crew quite the show. Ben wiggled on the spot in what Alethea clearly recognized as the Macarena. Don't worry, Uncle Stan. I can teach you so you can put on a private show for your girl here too. He winked. Everybody inside please, so I can lock up. Anemone called. Ben and the others trooped inside. Up the stairs, my apartment's the one on the right. Katina's place is the one on the left, but I've got a better coffee maker and cookies, so we're headed to mine. Oh, and watch out for the cat. Her name's Lucky and she likes to sneak out, so try and keep her inside the house please. She's not all that into new people, so she'll probably disappear as soon as the door's closed, but just in case. Anemone opened the door and a black streak raced out. Right into Dunstan's arms. He managed to keep hold of the struggling cat while everyone hurried into the house, but once the door was shut, he gave up and let the cat loose. Instead of leaving though, she headed straight for Stan, who'd taken a seat on the couch. After a few rubs against his shin, she vaulted into his lap and settled there, purring as she kneaded his jeans. Ah! Anemone stared at the cat for a long moment, before sitting opposite Stan. So Stanley Steel, how long have you been a gargoyle? A what? Stan and Alethea asked together. A gargoyle. Wings, horns, claws, tail, hard on that lasts all night, allergy to sunlight and no need to sleep, eat or drink? Ben said. But? Stan began, his eyes widening. Ben took the seat beside Stan and draped an arm around his shoulder. I'll handle the explanations. You girls take care of refreshments. Not because girls are better at it, except that Anemone and Rochelle would banish us from any kitchen, for good reason. Alethea raised her hand. I definitely belong in the band from the kitchen club too. She moved to take the seat on Stan's other side. Ben was having none of it. Which made no sense, because he definitely looked like the youngest person in the room. Nope, I need to talk to him about you, so you're going with the girls. I promise, if he tries to tell us about life in 19th century Scotland or the Swan River colony, we can match him, tail for tail. Besides, he's probably going to need a drink by the time we're done with him, and Anemone's the best one to make it. Anemone tucked her arm into the crook of Alethea's elbow. He'll be fine with them, I promise. They're mostly harmless when they're not trying to protect me from something. She grimaced. Wait, they're your protectors? Demon protectors? And she was married to one? Alethea could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Everyone burst out laughing except Alethea and Stan. No gargoyle protectors. Demons don't exist. Dunstan burst out amid more laughter. Ben stopped laughing. Yeah, they do. I met one once. At an art class. He gave me his business card in case I ever needed his services. I probably still have it somewhere. He glanced up to find everyone staring at him. What? It was a public art class. Open to anyone. It's not like they had a sign saying gargoyles and demons weren't allowed. We had a friendly chat. Just like we're going to have with Uncle Stanley here. Alethea swallowed. This was shaping up to be a bad idea. Do you want to help him? Give him his life back and his freedom? Anemone asked. Is that even possible? Alethea choked out. Anemone nodded. With your help, it could be. Come with me. Alethea followed her to the kitchen. 43. God, she's hot. Have you fucked her yet? Ben asked. Stan stared at him in horror, while the other men berated him for his lack of manners. What? She is hot. I'd like to paint her. On the beach in a swimsuit, Ben said dreamily. Then he shook himself. But not until the weather's warmer. Family beach picnic for Christmas at Bathers Beach. You up for it? When he didn't get a response, he sighed in annoyance. All right. I'll be serious. But seriously, breaking the curse is so much easier if you're fucking her, as talk can tell you. One night with Katina and boom. His wings fell off and he was a new man. He frowned. Rochelle and me were at it for ages before we broke the curse, and Anemone was carrying Dunstan's baby for months before he managed to break it. Maybe it helps if you do it in your monster form. The ladies seem to like it too, which helps. Stan wasn't sure what to say to this boy. Who are you, was all that came out. I told you. I'm Ben Stone. Me, Dunstan and Torsten are all your nephews. You sent our Ma and Da a letter telling us how wonderful life was at the Swan River colony, and how we should all come and join you, and that was it, until we arrived here and no one knew who you were or what happened to you. Then we got cursed into being gargoyles and woke up here. We each got assigned a lady to protect, which we did, except for Dunstan, who didn't use any protection obviously, which is why Anemone's now expecting twins. With the lady's help, we've all managed to break the curse, and then we went looking for you. And here you are. But you're not like me. You sound like them. He waved in the direction the women had gone. Dunstan laughed. You'll have to forgive Ben. He was the first of us to wake up in the present day, and he woke up in a school where he learned about the modern world from other boys his age. Ben gave him a dirty look. Teenagers at an art college, thank you very much. Boys and girls, because this is the modern day, not the dark ages when you went to school. And I'm as much a man as any of you. I've been awake for 21 years, but if you count the years I've been asleep, I'm closer to 200. When were you born? Stan asked. 1834. Stan blinked. That's the year I died. Except you didn't die because you're here now. Do you remember what happened? The night you were cursed? Dunstan leaned forward, eager to hear his answer. Ben pointed at his brothers. Neither of them remember the night we were cursed. I do, because I woke up when the asshole was cutting out my heart and killed him instead. Was it William Pierce who cursed you too? William Pierce? Stan shook his head. I've never heard that name. William Steel maybe, but first believe it was a woman who killed me. Carlton Steel, the woman I wanted to marry. Tell us, Dunstan demanded. Tell us everything. So Stan did. 44. Anemone set a cup of coffee in front of Alethea. Where'd you get him? Alethea considered spinning some sort of story about meeting him on a dating app, but this seemed more like a time for the truth. East Perth Cemeteries, she said instead. How? This bit wasn't going to sound good, even to people who believed in demons and other things. I went on a date with this guy who started stalking me. When I mentioned it to Callie, she said she had a spell to summon a protector for me. Rochelle's eyes widened. The girls' night Tacy tried to get me to go to? But Callie doesn't believe in magic. That's what I thought too, but she said she'd been talking to some sort of cartoonist. Ben. She must have been talking to Ben, Alethea realized. Anyway, she said it would be fun to try the spell, so we went down to the cemetery where we're doing an archaeological dig. But then security came and the others ran, but I twisted my ankle, so I distracted the security guard by calling for help to let them get away. Only Stan appeared and took me home. Flew you home? Katina asked. How could she possibly know that? Yes. Alethea wet her lips. But he said he was my demon protector. That I'd summoned him to protect me. Anemone stared dreamily into her coffee cup. All big and muscly and naked, ready to scoop you into his arms at the perfect possible moment? Gargoyles are amazing, aren't they? Oh, and once you get them into bed, rock hard all the way down and all night too. She sighed, then took a sip. He won't, we haven't. Alethea stammered. What are you waiting for? Seriously, monster sex is amazing. Once you get over the size of him, and the size is definitely a plus, it's the best sex you'll ever have. Once you've tasted monster, you'll never go back, Rochelle said. I would if he would, but he thinks he's a demon, and that if we do it he'll go straight back to hell, and he'll never see what's-her-name again, Alethea said darkly, taking a deep draught of her coffee. What is her name and what is she to him? Anemone asked. Alethea shrugged. Her name was Carlton Steel before she married Sean Bell and became Carlton Bell. She died in 1887, right here in Western Australia. She's actually one of my ancestors. Stan said he was supposed to marry her, but he also said she didn't know. The first time he saw me, he mistook me for her and asked me why I killed him, because he thinks it was her." Anemone looked grim. "He's in love with a dead woman, and the woman who cursed and killed him? Oh, that's messed up. Someone needs to tell Dunstan. Or Ben. Between them, they'll help him get his head straightened out and banish the killer witch, or at least help him realize what she is. He'll need to before he can break the curse. He'll need your help too. If you're interested in helping him, of course. I mean, the sex is phenomenal, but 200-year-old men are high maintenance. They don't know their way around a coffee maker. Or a microwave," Alethea chimed in. "Yeah, I promised I'd help him. I thought I'd regret making a deal with a demon, but he's been wonderful. Well, except for his sex hang-ups, of course." "That's because he's not a demon. He's a gargoyle. Turning to stone in sunlight is a pretty big tell," Anemone said. "He broke my bed and we had to get a new one." She looked up to find the others staring at her. "What?" "We forgot to close the curtains, woke up the next morning and he was stone. So heavy he broke the bed. That's all." She grinned. "So if you help him break the curse, your Stan won't break your bed. Even better, you can take him to the beach during the day, or go out to lunch together, and he'll actually eat. Seriously, if you can break the curse, he'll be almost like a normal man again, except with certain extra abilities. Oh, and he'll get his memories back too. Which could be very handy for an archaeologist who specializes in the time period he was actually alive." Yes, it would. All those reasons. But also, it would fulfill her promise to him, to help him. Maybe not in the way they'd hoped, but, was it wrong to hope she could have him and not Carline the killer witch? "What do I have to do to break the curse?" Alethea asked eagerly. 45. So basically, you're holding a torch for the crazy witch who cut out your heart and cursed you to a life of eternal slavery, because her brother was a snobby prick. Ben said, shaking his head. When you could be cuddling up to the curvy Marilyn Monroe look-alike in the kitchen, or, better yet, banging her brains out until the two of you find a way to break the curse? You have issues, dude. Serious issues. You want my advice? Go home, forget about the crazy dead fuckers in your past, who are definitely in hell where they belong, give that girl some good dick, then come back and we'll talk about curse breaking. But I'm not like you. I'm a demon, not a gargoyle, Stan said. All three men, his nephews if they were to be believed, shook their heads. Do you remember everything that ever happened to you? Ben demanded. Stan shook his head. It's part of the gargoyle enslavement spell. If you break the curse, you'll get all your memories back. Do you turn to stone in sunlight? Stan wanted to shake his head, but he'd be lying. He'd stuck his hand in the sun once before hitting the button to close the roller shutters. It had taken almost an hour before his hand had returned to normal. Yes. Gargoyle. Demons have no problem walking around in the sun and passing for normal people. Except the eyes. Their eyes can go completely black when they're angry or thinking something really dark. Do your eyes do that? Ben demanded. Stan shook his head. But he'd been so sure. Do you bleed when your skin is cut? Stan shook his head. His skin didn't cut at all. That's because you're made of living stone. You're a gargoyle. Demons have skin not much different to a human, and they bleed black. Face it, Uncle Stan. You're not a demon. You were a man until some crazy murderous bitch cut out your heart and turned you into a gargoyle, and now you're Marilyn's protector. Alethea. Her name is Alethea, not Marilyn, Stan snapped. But she still makes you hard in all the right places when you look at her, am I right? When you imagine what it might be like to get her naked in someplace safe, just you and her, your hardness to her softness and boom. It wouldn't be like. Stan felt his cheeks grow hot. He couldn't possibly be blushing. He didn't have blood, for heaven's sake. Unless Ben was wrong and he was a demon. I've never seen a gargoyle blush before. Hey guys, have you ever heard of a gargoyle blushing? Ben asked. His brothers shook their heads. Looks like you might have already started to resist the curse. That's good. Awesome, even. Now take your girl home and see if you can get blood to flow into other places, where you can actually do some good. Ben gave Stan a push. Come back once you've given Alethea a healthy helping of your cock. Stan wasn't sure what to make of his nephew. Of any of them, but the vulgar Ben in particular. He didn't want to believe them. But Ben sure did know a lot about gargoyles and demons, and the differences between them. He couldn't just give up on Carlton like that. He'd loved her all his life. But if Ben was right and what he remembered of that fateful night was true, Carlton had not only killed him but she'd cursed him, turning him into this creature. Then she'd gone and married someone else. She'd never cared for him. Never even known him. Yet she'd killed him without a second thought. Alethea would never do such a thing, kind-hearted lass that she was. All Alethea wanted was to help him, even when she did not need to do any such thing. He was her sworn protector, whether he was a demon or a gargoyle or some other kind of monster entirely. His sole purpose was to protect her. But if he was a gargoyle, like his nephews, who had not only bedded the women they protected and lived to tell the tale, but they'd managed to break free of the curse that bound them, so they were free to live their lives as they choose. To even marry, as Anemone and Dunstan planned to, when their babies were born. He needed to go home with Alethea. To talk all this over with her. While he decided whether to bed her, like Ben had so indelicately put it. 46. The drive home was surprisingly quiet. Alethea wasn't sure what Stan's nephews had said to him, but the stories Katina, Rochelle and Anemone had told her about helping their partners break the curse and find their place in this world, when it was so different to their own time, wow. A little voice in the back of her mind whined that these women had truly loved their partners, and that's why they'd gone to such great lengths to help them, while Alethea couldn't possibly feel that way about Stan, or she would have already broken the curse by now, just like they had. Alethea stomped on that voice, before putting her foot on the brake to stop at the traffic lights. She did care about Stan and she'd promised to help him. Maybe she wasn't completely head over heels in love with him, but when he kept talking about Carlton and how much his heart still belonged to her, no bloody wonder. She didn't want to get hurt, falling for a guy who didn't love her. But Stan would be so easy to fall for. All he'd have to do was look at her with those smoldering puppy dog eyes and say something in that voice that made her heart and her knickers melt, and she'd be gone. Lost. If only... if only he'd take a leaf out of Ben's book. Alethea could hardly believe he was from the past, when he seemed so normal. Well, not normal exactly, but like he fitted in with modern society so perfectly, no one would guess the truth. Rochelle had even shown her Ben's video channels. The man had millions of followers for his gargoyle cartoons, and he'd only been living in the present for a matter of months. But the cartoons themselves were, well, they could have taken place in her apartment instead of the shut-up cafe, with Stan as the gargoyle and her as the barista, because Ben had gotten the dynamic exactly right. The monster from the past, fighting to find his place in a world he didn't understand, and the strange epiphanies he had about the world that were either profound or funny, or a bit of both. Ben was quite a character, wasn't he? Alethea ventured. Stan grunted. She tried again. I'm tempted to go find his website when I get home and binge all his cartoons. The ones Rochelle showed me were just like... When we get home, I'll give you exactly 1 minute from the moment the door closes to undress before I tear all your clothes off, Stan growled. And there went another pair of knickers, soaked through. She didn't know what to say to that. Fuck yes, finally was the first thing that came to mind, But whatever happened to "do not tempt me"? This was totally out of character for Stan, no matter how much she wanted him. So she settled for one word: "Why?" His gaze seemed to sear her clothes off without even touching her. "Because last night I made a terrible mistake. I ignored my own desires and yours, for the faint hope of approval from a woman who killed me before she even knew me. I don't even remember what she looks like. When I think of her, all I see is you. Spread out naked on the bed before me, for me." Hell, her mouth was dry. Just the sound of the naked desire in his voice. She was ready to pull over onto the side of the road, drag him into the back seat of her car and... "So you have 1 minute from the moment that door shuts to save your clothing from being torn apart, for before this night is through, I will be deep inside you and nothing will stop me from taking what I want." She swallowed and swallowed again. She shouldn't want what he was saying. It was so wrong and yet sounded so right. "When we get home, we're going to have a detailed discussion about consent, buddy, because I don't think you understand how that works," she found herself saying, even as that tiny voice inside her was screaming yes, 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 yes for Kai's. He made a derisive sound deep in his throat, almost as if he could hear that voice too. "I understand what consent is. It's you saying yes, which you did last night and you will again, for I know you desire me as much as I desire you. I said yes to experimenting with oral sex, not you tearing my clothes off and burying yourself inside me like some mindless beast." But she totally would, especially if he asked her in that voice. Right now, in fact. "And that is how it will start. Yes, as you open yourself to me. Yes, as you wrap yourself around me. Yes, as you explode with the pleasure you know I can give you. Yes to doing it again until you beg for more, just like last night. And..." The pause stretched so long it made Alethea ache. Ache for all that he'd said he would do, as well as what would come next. "Yes," she prompted. He rumbled out a laugh. "Consenting already, I see. When I claim your body with my own, there will be no need for such words. Your body will know that you are mine and your lips will scream it for all to hear." Maybe they should stop on the side of the road. Because she was already panting for him, and if she was going to scream like he promised, it was probably better that the neighbors didn't hear. Or the whole building. Except that they were already pulling into the parking lot, and she'd waited long enough for this. To hell with the neighbors and whatever anyone else thought. She floated up the stairs, barely noticing the click of the door as it closed behind him. 1 minute, Alethea, before I make you mine," Stan growled in that voice. A minute was far too long. 47. Stan stalked her, following her to the bedroom as she shed her shoes, her jacket, her shirt and her stockings, before she struggled with the strange fastening of her skirt, something called a zip. He'd already removed his shoes and shirt along the way, but he would keep the trousers for a little longer. Until she begged him to remove them, at least. She swore as she tugged at the zip, her eyes widening as she turned around and saw how close he stood. Alethea squeaked, then forgot about the skirt and unfastened the tiny corset she called a bra, so that her breasts spilled out, begging him to touch them. Stan didn't care how much time had passed. He would have her now. He picked her up and tossed her onto the bed, nodding in approval as she crawled backwards until her back pressed against the pillows, just like last night. But unlike last night, her tight skirt kept her thighs together, preventing him from taking what she wanted to offer him. With both hands, he wrenched the skirt up to her waist, where it was no longer in his way. Her knees fell open, revealing the scrap of lace between her legs that was all that now stood in his way. He slid one claw between her skin and the offending lace, rubbing his knuckle against her wet heat as she gasped at his touch. Then a second claw as he met her questioning gaze. "I told you I would tear them off you," he said, as he shredded the useless piece of lace with his claws and tossed the remains on the floor. He lifted her legs over his shoulders just like last night, and traced her lower lips with the tip of his claw, circling that sensitive spot she called her clit until she shivered. Do I have your consent, Alethea? Fuck yes, she gasped. Please, Stan. Last night he'd taken his time exploring every inch of her most secret places. Now he knew exactly what to do to make her scream. Once, twice, 3 times. His trousers were growing so tight if he didn't take them off soon he'd burst the seams. God, and the taste of her, it was driving him wild. He licked at her lazily as he tugged off his pants, bringing her closer and closer to her next orgasm as his cock sprang free. She must have seen it, but she was no shy maiden to be frightened by his length and girth. Yes, please. Give me more, Stan. Please. He allowed himself one last lick, savoring her taste before pushing her hips down against the mattress, angled just right. Then he rubbed the head of his cock against her clit, now swollen from all the attention he'd lavished upon it. Oh yes. Yes, please, she begged. I will ruin you, he warned her. As if he had not ruined her already, by the rules of the society he'd grown up with. I will ruin you so thoroughly you might never forgive me. But I will claim you as my own too, so that you will never need another man in your life or in your bed. I need you inside me now. Alethea complained, wiggling her hips as though she meant to drag him inside her against his will. First you must say the words, he said, still stroking her with the head of his cock. Oh, she was close now. So close. Anything. Whatever you want, she said. Say you're mine. In the oldest traditions of his people, this was at the heart of marriage. 2 people said the words that bound them together, before consummating their union. No bands or brothers or anything else, but 2 people making a promise. It might not mean anything in the laws of this time, his nephews had said as much, but it would be enough to vouchsafe the future of his soul and hers, whether he was a demon, a gargoyle or some other monster entirely. Alethea's eyes regarded him, dark with desire over her beautiful breasts. Breasts he could not wait to caress. You're mine, she said, as her hand fastened around his cock, pulling him to her. He'd never met a woman so bold. But he loved her for it, more than ever. Stan closed his eyes, then opened them again. Perhaps this was not how the traditional words went, but times had changed and he must move with them. He freed himself from her hand, twining his tail about her wrist to keep her from grabbing him again. And you're mine, he said as he thrust deep inside her. She screamed, tight walls clenching down so hard Stan could do nothing else but savor the sensation of her searing heat, claiming him just as he claimed her. The orgasm released its grip on her body and she released her grip on him, so that he could move within her again. One slow thrust. Another. Mine, he growled as he drove deep again. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. 100, no, 1,000 times yes, as he took her, and she welcomed him until her pleasure built to another climax and she screamed his name. At some point her legs slipped off his shoulders, first one then the other, and he leaned down to bestow 1,000 kisses on each of her breasts, kneading them, sucking on her nipples until she came apart beneath him again, writhing with pleasure only he could give her. Over and over he took her, reveling in her ecstasy as he shared his own with her, until she collapsed atop him, utterly spent. Her head rested on her chest, her legs splayed on either side of his as he closed his wings around his bride, his beloved, and was finally content. The rest of the world could go to hell for all he cared, but he would stay right here. 48. Alethea woke aching both inside and out. Then she shifted and realized why. She'd fallen asleep on top of Stan, her head resting on his chest, and there was no doubting what they'd done last night, or imagining it had been a dream, because his enormous dick was still buried deep inside her at such a perfect angle that even the slightest movement sent sparks of electricity straight into her core. Strong hands fastened around her hips, lifting her so that she sat astride him, before his wings folded around her to hold her upright when her body threatened to lie right down again. She felt so boneless. Had they really made love for hours last night, for so long that she'd actually fallen asleep with him still inside her? You said when you'd rested, you wanted to ride me again, as soon as you woke. You were so determined you would not allow me to pull out, and you made me promise. Stan gently rocked her hips, grinding her sensitive skin against him, and a moan escaped from her lips. He rocked her again, but this time he thrust up to meet her, sending even more sparks into her core. Though she rode him, she knew that Stan was completely in control of their lovemaking, and she didn't care. After last night, no one knew her body as well as he did, and the things he could do with it. She was pretty sure she was riding a unicorn right now, one of those rare men who gave truly amazing dick. She found herself moving with him, so perfectly attuned to his body that it came as no surprise to hear him roar her name as she screamed his. Then she lay down on his chest again, tracing the muscles. "You're mine," she said. Stan cupped her breast in his hand. "And you're mine." She struggled to remember what he'd said last night, before asking her to say the words. There was something. "Why is it so important to you?" In ancient times, right up until I was a boy in Scotland, it was enough to say the vows and consummate the bond for a couple to be recognized as wed, by ancient custom. I know it is different now, with priests and banns and whatever modern things must be done for a couple to marry. But I have spent weeks believing I am a demon, damned to hell for eternity, and the one thing I would not do was damn you with me, no matter how much I wanted you. Last night, I began to believe that I might not be damned, that I might not be bound for hell, but I am still not certain, and I would not risk your soul on the advice of three men I barely know. So, we both said the words and consummated our union under the most ancient Scottish traditions. Alethea burst out laughing. Are you trying to tell me I'm your wife? That sometime last night, in the lust-fueled haze when I demanded your dick, you married me? It is not legally binding, or so I believe, and even in ancient times you would be free to divorce me, so it is not a true marriage in that sense, but... Stan swallowed. It is what I would have done with Carlton if I'd had the chance. I now know that would have been a mistake, but last night was no mistake. I meant to claim you and you claimed me, and then we... Oh, he looked so cute when he blushed. We had amazing sex for half the night, and again this morning. I probably should be angry with you. I mean, tricking someone into marriage during the throes of passion is probably about as underhanded as a drunken wedding in Vegas, but as you say, it's not legally binding. More like a betrothal or a promise. Or saying I love you. Stan snorted. What we did last night was much more than simply stating my feelings for you. I love you, I wish to share your bed forever, your smile lights up my world brighter than the sun. These are all things I could say over and over, and while they would be true, they are not as important as declaring we share a bond and consummating it by joining our bodies. She had to think about that. So, you aren't upset that I haven't said I love you? Yet. If he truly had forgotten Carlton to sort of marry her, she was pretty sure she was in danger of falling totally head over heels in love with him. If she hadn't already, sometime during the night. Stan shrugged. You will say the words if you want to, or you will not. But your eyes and your body have told me many times how much you care for me. Even now you refuse to let me go, your tight pussy holding fast to my cock tells me how much you love me. Fuck, he was still inside her. And she didn't want to move because he felt so good there. I should take a shower, she said. So she could think. So much had happened. I should come with you, he said, rising with her. If only to make sure you do not try to secretly pleasure yourself in there without me. I would definitely deserve to be divorced if my bride did not trust me enough to see to her needs. Alethea blushed. You knew about that? Stan grinned. You made noises that sounded like you were distressed. I had no choice but to check on you, just in case. And so what if I wished it were my hands between your thighs and not your own? A man is allowed to wish, is he not? I wished it was your hands too. There. She'd said it. Today they will be. Without another word, he carried her into the shower, so their love-making might continue. 49. When Alethea managed to pry herself away from Stan long enough to actually put some clothes on, she figured she should probably do some laundry too. Not to mention clean bedsheets. Once she'd set off the washing machine, she headed back to the bedroom with an armload of fresh linens to remake the stripped bed, only to hear a thumping sound against the wall. At first, she thought it might be the washing machine, but a quick check told her it was behaving itself just fine. She returned to the bedroom. What on earth? It wasn't until she heard a woman's voice screaming that she understood. Andrea, the accountant next door, must have company too. Company that had stayed overnight, and she was still enjoying this morning. Wait, was she shouting his name? Alethea pressed her ear to the wall, hoping it might help her hear better, but it turned out Andrea wasn't shouting a name at all. It sounded like she was screaming, "This is the way." Not just once but repeatedly. What a strange thing to say during sex. Shaking her head, Alethea headed for the kitchen, where Stan had decided to brave the coffee machine. He still eyed the toaster with suspicion, but this week's grocery order had included almond croissants, so he'd put one of them on a plate for her, which suited her just fine. Alethea stilled. Only one plate and 1 cup of coffee. Well, he still had his horns and wings, so she shouldn't be shocked, but... "I'm sorry we didn't manage to break the curse last night, Stan. Maybe if we try again tonight." Stan turned and grinned at her, holding out her coffee. "Sure, if you want. But I'm not sorry. Not about last night, or about still having wings and things. I have you, and you're worth more to me than food or coffee or even sunlight. The curse binds me to you, so I'm not even sure I need to break it, if it means I must protect you. Which I would do anyway, because no one is more precious to me than you." Down went the coffee on the table, and he wrapped his arms around her. Blue eyes stared down at her, filled with love, before his lips descended on hers, and Alethea felt like it was just two of them, dancing in the stars, just like the first time they'd kissed. It was Stan who broke the kiss, but only so that he could remind her to drink her coffee before it got cold. After breakfast, when Alethea went to shake the croissant crumbs into the bin, she realized she'd been ignoring other chores too. "I'll just take the rubbish downstairs. Then if you want, I can research gargoyles and demons for you, so we can put what we learned last night into perspective." The recycling bin was threatening to overflow, so Alethea took a bin in each hand and headed downstairs to deal with them. The big wheelie bins lined a short alley beside the car park, so she emptied each of her kitchen bins into the corresponding ones that the council trucks would pick up later in the week, then turned to head back upstairs. Only to find Bigger blocking her way. Standing in the sun, where Stan couldn't come to protect her. Fuck. She lifted one bin in front of her, ready to whack him with it if necessary. "I'm warning you. If you don't get out of my way and leave me alone, Stan will hunt you down. You shouldn't be here, Bigger." "Is Stan the big guy who threatened me before?" Bigger asked. "Your boyfriend?" Alethea started to nod, then realized how that would look. "He is now, but he wasn't when I was chatting to you, or the night we met. He just kind of appeared in my life and she wanted to screw him all night, then fall asleep with him inside her, so they could do it all again in the morning." She felt her cheeks grow hot. "I'm sorry." "No, I owe you an apology. I mistakenly thought we were soulmates, destined to be together, but I was wrong. Because of you, I found my real soulmate, and we never could have worked. Andrea and me, we're perfect for each other. We even finish each other's sentences. I knocked on her door because I was worried about you, about your new boyfriend, because I thought he'd hurt you. You were limping and—" Alethea blinked. She'd been limping? Oh right. I twisted my ankle. Stan came over to stay with me to help me get around while it was healing. He can be really protective sometimes. And it was really hot too. Him growling mine with every thrust until she fell apart around him. Well, I was worried, so I knocked on your neighbor's door to ask if she'd noticed anything suspicious. And when Andrea answered, she was wearing the exact same t-shirt I was, only she had the matching mug. We got to talking, and then one thing led to another, and it was his turn to blush. Sorry if we got a bit loud last night. We're trying for a baby, you see, because we both want one, and all the natural fertility books say you need to have lots and lots of sex. She and Stan had been too busy having lots and lots of their own sex to notice, but she was hardly going to tell Bigger that. Wait. Like when she screamed, "This is the way?" He went bright red. You heard that. Sorry. We might have gotten a little carried away. We'll try to be quieter next time, I promise. Thanks. Alethea paused. Was that all? Will you let me through now? Yeah. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. And that I hope you find your own soulmate. I'm sorry I wasn't yours, he said as he moved aside so she could pass. Apology accepted. And you know what? Maybe I will. So you don't need to worry about me. I hope you and Andrea will be very happy together. Alethea marched back up to her apartment with her head held high. It wasn't until she'd closed the door behind her that she allowed herself to sink down with her back against it, and let out the laugh that had threatened to escape all the way from the bins. What is it? Stan asked. Are you all right? You should have left the rubbish until dark, so I could go and dispose of it. Yeah, she probably should have, but then she wouldn't have known what her neighbor shouted during sex with Justin Bieber. What did that even mean, anyway? Maybe it was something they'd gotten from the fertility books. When she could stop laughing long enough to catch her breath, Alethea said, It's fine, Stan. I think you really did scare my stalker away, and he won't be bothering me again. Not if he was spending every spare minute trying to make a baby with Andrea. That is good news. Then perhaps I will worry less about your safety when we leave the house. Stan nodded, then turned serious. Actually, I was thinking about last night. Alethea grinned. So was I. If I'd known what an amazing lover you'd be, I would have tried harder to seduce you earlier. He blinked as if he was surprised. Not about the sex. About before that. About being a gargoyle and under a curse which can be broken. Now it was Alethea's turn to frown. But you said you didn't care about that. That you didn't mind that we hadn't broken the curse. I don't mind, but I'm not the only one who needs to know about it. You see, I'm not the only demon or gargoyle or whatever you summoned that night. My cousins, they came back too. More gargoyles? How had Alethea not seen them? Wait, were gargoyles the reason for all the empty graves at the cemetery? They'd found at least a dozen of them. A dozen gargoyles flying around the city, they'd cause chaos. If they hadn't already. How many? She asked. There were 4 of us. 1 protector for each girl. Each girl? 4 protectors, 4 girls. You mean the other girls I was with that night? Oh hell. This was not good. If a gargoyle had stalked Callie. Or Tacy. Or gotten anywhere near Tacy's daughter, Rory. And Octavia, she wasn't frightening by herself, but she knew people. Scary people. People who trusted her to fix their IT problems and keep their secrets, who owed her a favor. What happened to them? Where are they now? Alethea asked. Stan looked blank. We all flew to you to answer the summons. When I spotted you, I claimed you as mine and told them to get their own mistress. They were still flying around trying to decide who got who when I flew you home. I had to remind them that you were mine several times before they finally flew off after the other girls. So if the girls drove home like I told them to, your gargoyle friends probably followed them? Alethea said slowly. Stan nodded. Of course. As I am your protector, they each chose a girl to protect. They would not have left them. 3 poor cursed guys from the past. Stan's cousins. Which made them family. Alethea closed her eyes. We have to help them. It's kind of you to offer, but there's no need. Really? I'm sure they are adequate protectors, and nothing bad will happen to your cousins. They are just as safe as you are. Stan didn't understand. He didn't know her family. He was a Regency man who thought women needed to be protected, instead of living a life of their own making. And the girls of Bell House were, by definition, the sort who grabbed life by the balls in every way possible, until life gave them what they wanted. Stan had no idea what his poor cousins were likely to be dealing with. I'm not worried about my cousins, Stan, I'm concerned about yours. Especially if they've all gone to Bell House. Oh hell, she should have gone for a visit sooner. They were probably all garden statues outside Bell House right now. With UV lamps on at night to keep the poor blokes at bay. Because if anyone knew how to deal with supernatural creatures, it was Callie. Alethea needed to brush up on her research. Gargoyles, demons, what else? Whatever she had time for, she guessed. As soon as it's dark, I'll take you to them. Because if your cousins followed Callie and Tacy and Octavia back to Bell House, a gargoyle curse will be the least of their problems, believe me. Stan's eyes widened. Are they witches like Carlton? Well, we're all descended from her, so any of us could have inherited it, but I think Callie's the only one who really qualifies. She can curse you something wicked, and she's the one who worked out how to summon you all, so if anyone's a witch, she might be. A witch who didn't believe in magic. Or good men. One woman is truly a danger to 3 grown men? Stan didn't want to believe it. Alethea turned grim. Callie and her curses are a danger to all men. Especially if they piss her off. And her favorite curses? You can't break them if you're not fluent in Latin or ancient Greek. Then we must rescue them before she kills them, Stan said. Or worse, Alethea added under her breath. This has been Stone Guardian. A Paranormal Protector Tale. Book 1 in the Heart of Steel series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Charlotte from Google.